I was thinking that we'd start, I ask you questions, and you answer yes or no. Were you the mastermind that cheated the Olympics?
Yes.
Today, the World Anti-Doping Agency suspended Russia's sports drug testing lab.
99% of Russian athletes are guilty of doping.
It's worse than we thought.
If this is true, it is an unimaginable level of criminality.
I was helping to facilitate one of the most elaborate doping ploys in sport history.
This goes all the way back to 1968. Every sport. Was Putin aware of the existence of a Russian doping system?
Yes. We are top-level cheaters.
This all can be proved. It's quite mind-blowing.
New York Times is breaking tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
That has the potential of affecting the credibility of all sport. Why would I watch an event that's fixed?
You in any danger?
Yes. Oh, I need to escape. Putin will kill me.
Holy shit.
Putin calls the claims the slander of a turncoat.
2 people connected with the Russian doping program are already dead.
There never was anti-doping in Russia, ever.
Well, Bryan, it's been an interesting journey. We first met, well, we met through Tim Comerford.
That's right.
Our mutual friend who's been on this podcast. And Timmy C called and said, dude, my buddy's making a documentary. You're not going to believe it. And it's going to be so good for you. And he's going to do this bike race in Europe, and he's going to dope for it. And he did it last year, and he's going to see how he can do better, and he's going to evade the tests, and he wants to meet with you. So we met April 2015 in Los Angeles.
Yeah, was it April? Yeah, 2015.
We went back and looked.
Yeah,
because we were curious, because time it's crazy how time flies, right? But I'll just never forget, like, you laying this thing out there, and I said to you, I said, who's helping do that? Like, how do you know? He said, I have this Russian guy. And when you first started to tell me the idea, I was like, this guy's fucking crazy. And then when you said you had a Russian guy, then I was like, okay, I'm out. This is not true. This can't be happening. And it's so fucking crazy that it actually happened.
Yeah, and then I showed you that 25-minute piece that we had put together.
Yeah. I mean, it's I don't know whether you're brilliant or lucky or all of the above. I mean, to come across this story, right? I mean, who'd have thunk it?
I certainly didn't think it when I started on it, but you know, I knew that going in that Grigory certainly had secrets, and even in that piece that I had shown you back in April of 2015, there was all those like hints in there, and I wasn't sure where it was going to go to. I couldn't have imagined, you know, ultimately what the information he had, but it was clear that that he was involved in a much
and you do a good job of going into it in Icarus, talking about. I mean, look for, and I guess I can speak to this from experience. If you had access to a WADA accredited lab, I guess anybody could probably go get their urine tested somewhere, but it's a little different than going to a WADA lab. So if you had access to that and you could try things and test it out and try things and test, like that's the holy grail, right? And so I just couldn't believe that was actually possible. And in watching Icarus, which it took me a while to come around and see this film for a whole lot of other reasons, Don Catlin's role in the thing, like Don Catlin, who I've known forever, everybody in this movement, you know, he's sort of an iconic figure. You know, the way Don connected you with Grigory it was surreal.
And I don't think, you know, what was interesting is, you know, Don basically originally was going to help me.
Right.
and then his son got involved, and Oliver was like, "This is not a good idea, Dad."
I agree with Oliver.
You know, and like, I don't think it's a good idea. And so, you know, he ultimately decides that he's not going to help me. But one of the biggest variables for Don was also that he was no longer at the UCLA lab. So he's going, well, I don't have access to a WADA lab. How am I going to get your samples into a WADA lab? And he refers me to Grigory, but I mean, he certainly referred me to Grigory knowing, I think, a lot more than he let on. I mean, he certainly didn't know the extent of what was going on. He didn't know the urine swapping, but he knew that Grigory in that Russian lab was not on the up and up.
Right. And what, you know, probably everybody that watches Icarus has to ask the question, because you guys are talking on the phone, Skyping from LA to Moscow. Why does this guy, Grigory, the scientist, the doctor, why does he trust you? Like, just from I don't really trust anybody at this point in my life, but I'm like, why is he believing you? Like, you could be anybody. You could be out to get him. You could be out to blackmail him. You could, like, I mean, you're a charming guy, but Jesus, nobody's that charming, right?
No, I mean, look, it was surreal in that regard.
Right.
There's a story that's not in the film, and a lot of it really had to do with just the creative storytelling. And I had started corresponding with Grigory literally as Sochi was going on, and we're emailing back and forth, and
he's up late at night.
Yeah, he's up late at night. And I guess
if you watch the film, you'll understand why he's up late at night.
Right, and I guess while he's waiting for the clean urine to come to swap, he's like emailing me.
Yeah,
but
you're like, God, this dude stays up late. I mean, this is really strange.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, I'm at the Sochi
nocturnal.
Olympics, and coming out of those Olympics, I think he felt a huge just burden. And what Grigory said to me is that at the end of those Olympics, and then in those couple months after, there was nowhere further for him to go. And I think he felt like this had essentially reached, as he said, its proper course, that there was nowhere more that he could do as far as the scandal that he had pulled off. And so he invites me to come meet him. He's lecturing at a symposium in Oregon for the IAAF, part of the Junior World Championships that were in Oregon in July of 2014. So I go up there and I make a decision that I'm not going to bring a film crew. I'm just going to go meet him and, you know, talk to him. And we start hanging out. He's a big drinker. We drink, we bond, we become buddies. And I sit him down, and I've got my little Vixia camera, this little handheld thing, and he agrees to let me interview him. And I said, hey, do you believe an Olympic medal can be won without performance-enhancing drugs? And he looks at me and he goes, I should believe, I try to believe, I want to believe, but I do not believe an Olympic medal can be won without performance-enhancing drugs. And then he takes this long pause and he goes, I don't know, maybe I'm a bad man.
Oh, there's your green light.
And that was a moment. And I then,
by the way, I disagree with him. I mean,
I disagree with him too.
I mean, I believe that Michael Phelps.
Yeah.
I don't think Michael Phelps takes PEDs.
Yeah, but I disagree with him too, and I believe that also. But in Grigory's mind, right? I mean, here's this guy who his entire life had been in this system. I mean, starting as a kid, he was taught the way onto the national team is to take steroids. And if you don't take steroids, you're not going to be on the national team. And if you get on the national team and you don't want to take steroids, you're not going to be on the national team.
I mean, it was so, in the movie, that was one of the times where you were totally stumped, because he's talking about he was a young aspiring runner and he was good. He's getting to the next level, to the national level. He's given some steroid, and he says, and my mother would inject me.
Yeah.
And you were like, wait, time out. Your mother, his mother was injecting. That's a little weird.
Well, because when you look at, I think it's a difference where, you know, from our Western perspective, our American perspective, right? We go, wait, no parent would condone their child taking steroids. No parent would help their child.
Right.
And yet the Russian perspective is that's just what you do. And that's how everybody does it.
I know, but isn't it weird? Like your mom, like in the butt, like I think that's a little strange.
I mean, it's definitely strange.
That's a little close, I think.
But, I guess she wanted Grigory to win.
But he had a lot of those, at least during maybe you selected those or that was part of the narrative. He had a lot of those moments because you had this childlike old Russian guy, not old, but I don't know how old is he? He's
58.
But, but he's childlike, he's boyish.
Yeah.
But he would say these things that were dark. He'd talk about, pornography and prostitution. And I'm like, wait. That 8-year-old just started talking about prostitution. Oh, wait, no, he's 50-something. You couldn't figure, but he was super, super charming. Like, he was like one of these dudes just like dancing around. We could not love him by watching it.
One of my editors said he's like Baby Huey.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the thing about it. You never knew what was exactly coming, and yet what ended up being the case is that every single thing he said was true.
Yep.
And so he'd say these outlandish things, and we're going, wait, is this true? Is this true? And, and sometimes you go, wait, this can't be true. And then it was true.
Right.
And then he proved it to be true.
Right. That's what happened with me and you.
Yeah.
I was like, this guy is batshit crazy. And on top of it all, he's full of shit. I'm like, I'm out. And it's just, it's mind-boggling. I got to tell you, and I told you this on the phone a few weeks ago when I finally got around to watching Icarus. I don't watch, when I travel, I watch stuff right here on this laptop. And I can't download Netflix, at least I can't. Maybe you can. I can't download movies on a laptop off Netflix. You can do it on your phone or your iPad.
Right.
But I was like, the phone's too small and I don't have an iPad, so I just never did. But man, it was like a cold jury day in Austin, and Ann and I sat down and we're like, all right, let's watch it at home on Netflix. And she was like, okay, I can only watch half because I have to go to yoga, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, okay, I'll watch the second half later. She's like, I'm not leaving. Like, screw the yoga. I can't get up. Like, it is that good, folks. I'm telling you this. You already know this, but I'm telling the people listening at home and now watching at home, 2018, you can watch us. But where was I going with that? So the premise originally started with you training for haute route, which is a European. They now have it in America, by the way.
Yeah, they brought it to the Rockies.
They brought it to Colorado last year. So you had done haute route in 2014, and you wanted to
clean.
Clean.
Right, and I met you after I'd done a clean, right as I was starting to dope.
You were and then the plan was to come back in 2015, charged up.
Yeah. With the hope that I'd win it.
With the hope that you'd win it, and in 2014
and still
you got
be
14th.
clean.
You were 14th.
Right.
Which is pretty dang good.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I was wrecked, man, though.
You looked wrecked.
At the end of that.
When you're sitting in, I don't know what you're sitting in.
That was up at, Mont Ventoux, at the top of Ventoux.
It didn't.
In that little coffee shop.
I've never been in it. I don't go into the coffee
you don't
shop.
It wasn't even a coffee shop. It was like you could get
terrible.
You could get a Coke, and I remember, and I walked in, I came in, I basically collapsed off the bike. Like, I go in there, and I, grab, 3 sodas out of the machine. He's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? The French were freaking out, and I'm just, on the floor. I was.
You're so L.A.
Yeah, I know.
That's an L.A. move right there.
Yeah, I know. I was embarrassed, but
what are I was curious because I was watching. I mean, I have my own suspicions about amateur cycling. I don't really know that I chime in about it much, but I'm sure these guys are super strong. The guys that are
super strong
and winning.
I mean, those guys, and it's all guys. The first year, but it's all these guys that are basically 35 to 45 that take cycling way too seriously.
Do they have jobs?
That's the mystery of it, because none of these guys are paid, and yet they're training like they're professionals. They're racing like they're professionals, and they're like 38-year-old men taking risks on descents, like they're 18.
But that doesn't surprise you.
Yeah.
Please tell me any crit that you've done in Balboa Park or Griffith Park. You know what massive cycling is like. They think they're sprinting for the yellow jersey.
Yeah, and there's $1 million contract waiting for them at the top of Ventoux.
And so can they? I guess they can compare times. Like if you did the Ventoux, you could easily compare the times from Haute Route and the guys that do it.
Well, the guy who has won Haute Route like 6 years in a row is this guy Peter Pooley. Yeah. And when you look on Strava at his times, he's literally across the leaderboard, #1 on basically every single climb in the Alps, the Pyrenees, and the Dolomites. Faster than Laurent Tendam, faster, swear to God. And he raced in 2 tours, got nabbed for doping.
Oh.
And then instead of serving his sentence, he retired, went to Thailand, and got sponsored by Thailand to be the ambassador to cycling for Thailand. And so Thailand brings him out to these Haute Routes every year, and they film it as like basically a race for like Thailand to promote cycling in Thailand.
And he trains in Thailand?
Yeah, he trains in Thailand. Like he lives in Thailand.
Well, when they showed him winning, he has his kid there. I mean, it's like the dude is winning the Tour de France. He's
there
with his kid.
Oh, yeah,
he's kissing everybody. And
oh, yeah. And this guy, I mean, when you look at his times, I mean, he was putting up Tour times up those climbs.
All right, well, that was my question. I mean, that's because I can see, you know, I know those climbs. I can roughly see that, hey, these boys are not going slow. Yeah. But then so the objective was to go back in 2015, charged up, evade the tests, and do better, and it didn't happen.
That's right. Yeah, there's a lot of things that didn't happen. I mean, I had a little crash that I didn't show that cost me a few minutes. I had a flat on a flat on the first day, and the way the race is set up is it's all like neutral support. You can't have like your own you know, team car because, you know, it's amateur and they don't want other people to have an advantage. So I had to wait 3 minutes for a wheel. And then by the time I got the wheel, the climb had started. I couldn't get back on. And then my DI2 cable disconnected. It was like 40 degrees that day. And but either way, I wasn't going to win.
But wouldn't you? Well, let's back up a little bit because the as you start to watch the doc, and for the listener at home who hasn't seen it, it's a 2-hour documentary. Roughly the first third is this pursuit, right? This story, which was the original story, the one that I thought was so damn crazy. And then, of course, this story twists, and then the last 2/3 is now like Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in a boxing ring or something. And
that's a good way to put it.
It's so interesting. But I mean, as you're in LA preparing for, you were in Boulder and both Boulder and Los Angeles, preparing for Haute Route with the drug and with doping. You know, you were like, my buddy called me and he was like, after he watched it, he was like, dude, was that your life? Like, that is crazy. Like, did you have to do all that? And so when I watched it, I was even like, holy shit. Like, first of all, just from somebody who knows, you didn't need to do 75% of that. I mean, all the anabolics, all the HCG, all of that's unnecessary.
Well, see, what I never did, which I was scared to do, was to do a blood bag. Yeah. Like, I never did that. And
well, you didn't need to do that either.
Really?
No, because if you had, and not to get, I guess we are going to get specific, but you know, Ferrari would always tell us, all you need is the red cells. So all the power stuff, you're strong. Those cyclists, you can do certain types of training to increase strength. The red cell, once you have the red cells, and if you have the green light to take EPO, which you did clearly, that would have been enough. But the images are people watching you, like jabbing yourself in the ass, and it was bleeding everywhere, and I don't know what it was that was in those syringes. It's like,
most of that was vitamins at that point.
Yeah, it looked like copper. I was taking, like, what is that?
Yeah, because I was taking testosterone.
Yep.
I was taking EPO. I was taking HCG. Yep. I was taking thyroid. I was taking DHEA. And then I was taking like a whole slew of these vitamin injections. And most of those, in those syringes, were most of the vitamins.
Yeah.
And that folic acid, that one hurts.
Yeah.
There's a couple of them really hurt. But
that you have to have for the
EPO. The folic for the EPO, to get the EPO to absorb.
Yeah, I was shocked. Like, I thought I'd seen some stuff in my day, and I was like, damn.
I was committed.
Yeah, no, you were committed.
Yeah.
And you got lean. Like, you could see it as the process went through. I was like, man, I mean, you must have been down to 3 or 4% body fat.
Yeah, I was like I weigh 140 pounds.
Yep.
I was down to about 129.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so, and during the first third, they're doing all this testing. You're in the lab being tested. I have it written down here. Your watts. Your watts go from 250. This is probably a threshold.
Yeah.
So 250 watts to 349 watts.
Yeah.
That is an insane jump.
Yeah, I was able to average basically like 349 watts up Latigo. Like
wow.
I could sustain 349 for like a climb.
It felt pretty good, didn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you must have felt that in Haute Route. Like you must, when you're there, you must have been like.
I was, it
unless
was,
everybody else in the field did the same.
Well, what was interesting is, you have like in that second year 650 guys, right? But of those 650, 400 of them are really just there just to finish, just to be like, I finished this thing.
Yep.
And then you got about 250 that are there to race it. And of those 250, you've got 50 that are good. And of those 50, you've got 10 that are basically pro level. They're putting up times that are, is like serious. And I was kind of like right under those 10 guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for me was the recovery. That was really what it was.
Yeah.
It was just the recovery.
But it just goes to show you, and cycling, and I've talked about this a lot last summer during stages, but cycling is so much more. I mean, cycling, you have to worry about mechanicals. You have to worry about crashes. You have to worry about tactics. You have to worry about politics within the group. You have to worry about getting sick. I mean, these are all things that to me, that's what, when people talk to me about Icarus, they're like, oh my God, this guy did all this stuff. And guess what? He did worse.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, it's not because he did that stuff that he did worse. It's because he had mechanicals and he had a crash. And once you have those two things, then your morale dips. So it's day in, day out on the road, like everything has to be perfect. And that's why when I look back on my run, I was like, how did nothing ever not happen? Like nothing.
Yeah, the thing that and look, I was never in your shoes, but the thing that for me was the most extraordinary about your victories was knowing the variables in cycling. And so to doping, not doping, to be able to get through 7 tours without basically a catastrophe, and knowing that what is going on along the way, that a flat can take you out, a crash can take you out, missing a break, getting in a crosswind. I mean, there are so many variables, and to be able to do that for 7 years,
I look
3 weeks at a time. I mean, it's unreal.
It's I will say to you and to the listener that it's hard to do. The first one's hard because you really don't have any respect. And you know what this is like, even racing locally or Haute Route, like if people don't know you, they're like, who are you? Get out of the way. So we had to fight for every position in year 1 and really into year 2. Once you get past that, then they're like, okay, we just took over the front, and it's just a lot easier when you basically occupy or just plant yourself at the front of the group. Nobody tries to take that place away from you. It makes life a lot easier. So that's the only thing that's really the only thing I can point to that made it possible. If we had to fight like we had to fight in year 1 for all 7 years, it probably wouldn't. I mean, there would have been a crash, there would have been a mechanical, there was something.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing because every second you're in a race like that, I mean, all that's going through my mind is we're going down, a descent at 100 kilometers an hour is just one thing, and you're over.
Yeah,
and everybody is taking extraordinary risks. Is the thing. It's like nobody is within their right frame of mind, and they're all taking extraordinary risks.
Yeah,
and so they're like,
and they're all scared.
Yeah, and to navigate that, and in the Haute Route, they weren't closing the oncoming lane of traffic on these descents.
Oh, that's good. Guys crossing the yellow line, I bet.
And there were a couple guys in there that are like 19, 20-year-old, like French national team, and these guys were taking these risks, and all of a sudden you come around the corner, and there's a car, and I'm like, this is crazy. What am I doing?
Oh, let's talk about Grigory. So this for the listener who hasn't seen this guy, the part that surprised me about Grigory and I never knew any of this happened, when he started talking about the steroid market, right? Worldwide, most of these steroids were produced in
China.
At the time, were produced in China. China gets the games. Jacques Rogue, who was the head of the IOC at the time, told them, okay, you're going to get the games, but you have to stop manufacturing these steroids. And so I got a little lost when I guess another coach or trainer in Russia was manufacturing or sourcing steroids that weren't as pure. I mean,
so here's the as abbreviated story behind that. So China gets the games, right? And they're making, and had been selling for years and years, pure steroids to Russia and to other countries as well. So if it was oxandrolone, it was oxandrolone, and it was pure oxandrolone, like basically the difference between cocaine and meth, right? and pure coke, right? So they're getting pure drugs sent to them. So if the Russians are on oxandrolone, they know that there's nothing else in that oxandrolone. And so when you go to test it, right, they're not, as long as they know that it's just oxandrolone, you aren't going to test positive for other things. And
you're going to test positive for oxandrolone.
Right, but they can basically not test for oxandrolone. They can conceal the oxandrolone, but it's just one substance. So what happened with China?
What if they're in Switzerland?
Well, this was all coming through the Russian lab in preparation for, the game. So they weren't,
they just stayed.
Right, because they weren't going to be tested internationally unless they left the country.
That makes it a lot clearer. I just assumed they were traveling and racing.
Right. And so what China did is, so they start selling, essentially to get Russia nabbed, they start sending Russia dirty steroids on purpose. So the Chinese are sending dirty steroids to Russia, and they're coming through this coach, Sergei Portugalov, who's basically the coach of the national team, who would run the whole program, was doping the athletes, was overseeing their protocols. So Portugalov is giving these athletes the steroids that are coming from China, thinking that he's giving them oxandrolone, but it's oxandrolone, and there's a bunch of other stuff in it. So then it's coming to Grigory's lab, and the athletes are testing positive. And once it's in
he's seeing this.
Right, and once it's in the Adams system, once you've registered it and everything, there's no way for him to conceal what the test is. So Grigory goes to Portugalov and goes, "You're messing us up. You're selling the athletes dirty steroids." Well, Portugalov was like, "Well, what do you want me to do?" Grigory's like, "You have to throw these drugs away. You can't do it." So Portugalov didn't want to do it because it was going to put him out of business. So Grigory starts manufacturing steroids on his own. And he literally goes to like a lab in Kazakhstan, somebody that he knows, and he starts basically having the pure steroids manufactured so that the Russian team would not test positive. Because if they test positive, the lab was going to shut down, he was going to lose his job, and he was protecting the national team.
But then Portugalov
in turn
gets upset.
Because
he loses his business.
Loses his business, turns on Grigory, and basically reports Grigory to a higher up at the FSB. Now, of course, they're all in on it, but it's like being pulled over for a speeding ticket, and if you pay the cop $100 in Russia, right, you walk free. So he involves higher ups at the FSB than Grigory knows, right? They start. And they come and arrest Grigory to basically put Portugalov back into business. So Grigory thinks that he's going to go to jail for the rest of his life. He's charged with drug trafficking, all this kind of stuff. But he hadn't really done anything wrong. He was protecting the national team. And on the eve of the London Olympics, Putin gets wind that his mastermind, his scientist, is basically sitting in a hospital, psychiatric hospital, ready to go to jail for the next 20 years of his life. The case drops, he's set free, and he goes to London and onwards to Sochi.
And the FSB is a new way to say
KGB.
The KGB. So, I mean, most people, like I know, if you said to me FSB, I'd be like, is that like a football thing? Or...
Yeah, KGB and FSB are the same thing.
It's the same thing.
Nothing's identical.
Changed. But then then they become a central part to this story. I mean, you guys did a great job animating the way, and I'm assuming that's pretty accurate, the way the lab was built, the floor plan of the lab.
Oh, yeah, that was down. What we had is we had Grigory had the blueprints, the actual blueprints of a lab, because he oversaw the lab construction. So this plan was in place for years and years and years. So as they were designing the lab, they were designing how they were going to basically have this secret room where the cameras were going to be placed, where they could swap the urine. I mean, this was all thought out way in advance. So Grigory had the blueprints. Yep. And part of what he provided to our team was the blueprints.
Right.
And so
it's that, yeah, then it's
so when we went to this company to do the CGI, you know, they designed it off the blueprints, and we kept going back to Grigory, and Grigory would be like, no, it was like this, it would go like this. And so that whole sequence in the film is incredibly accurate.
That's so fascinating.
That is the actual blueprint from the lab.
When you guys gave it to the New York Times, and then they came with the story with the blueprint and the hole in the wall. I mean, I was like, no way. There's no way, no how. This is bullshit. It's just crazy that maybe it's not crazy. I mean, if you get to go build the lab and you can do that. I mean, I guess you had, like we said, you had to wait until, because it's not just Grigory and all of his coworkers in there. You have WADA in there. You probably have some
IOC in there.
IOC, some people to oversee, make sure that checks and balances, everybody's playing fair, so to speak. But they stayed up late.
Yeah, and then they had created this back portion of the lab, the maintenance area of the lab, that was outside of the security perimeters, that were outside of the cameras. And so all the regular lab doings are under cameras, and then basically through this security door, there are no cameras, and they've set up a back entrance, and that back door basically is their way over to the KGB building across from the lab, where basically the clean urines are held. And they had figured this whole thing out. And what was interesting, and when you think about Grigory and thinking ahead, those photos, which were kind of the nail in the coffin, that there was this mouse hole, that there was a hole in the urine aliquoting room going into basically the room where they would swap out the dirty urine for the clean urine.
Did that first room have cameras?
The first room, the aliquoting room, had cameras in it.
Well, how can they not see them getting on the ground and sticking the vials through the hole?
That's a good question. I don't know how they had that. I don't know how they had that wired. Maybe there wasn't cameras in
when we get to the part of
room.
how they opened the bottles, if you can do that, then you can figure out one camera in one room.
Yeah, I mean, they had figured it out somehow. Maybe there weren't cameras in the aliquoting room. There's cameras throughout the corridors. Yeah. There's cameras, but maybe not in the aliquoting room.
Once they get to that, because that's sort of the inner sanctum of the lab. Yeah. But it's just so much to take in. I'm glad I watched it a second time flying up here today, because the first time I literally got to the end, I was like, okay, I don't think I understood all that. Like, it is. And then between the first McLaren report around Rio and then the second McLaren report, it is just so much to take in. I was completely overwhelmed, and in the most impressed way. But the thing that, and I'd love to get into, just, because, my shtick all the time was I passed 500 tests. And, now people look at that and say, oh, that was a bunch of BS. Well, the reality is I did pass 500 tests. And so later I want to get into just how that's possible. But in the process of doing 500 tests, I know the process. You walk in, you give you pee in the cup. Somebody watches you pee. You can't just go in there alone. So they're physically watching you, staring at you. They then take that cup and split it up into an A and a B sample, which you guys do a great job of showing how that's done. And then these bottles are sealed with this. The bottles are glass, at least I think they're glass, but it has this metal ratchet system. And when you just, as you're doing it, you're thinking to yourself, this is never coming off. But of course, the labs have a machine that can take it off. The fact that they could get the tops off, there's something wrong here. I mean, there's something. I don't care if it's the KGB. Something else was at play.
Well, the company designed the bottles, the Swiss company Berlinger.
That would be my first people I would question.
Yeah, and the great thing is, as you see in the film, we have that commercial that WADA puts out, basically just like about a year ago, showing that these bottles are Fort Knox, that nobody can get into these bottles.
The toughest financial institutions in the world use this.
And this is the protocol that, you know, to everybody subscribed to. And according to Grigory, they had decided that they were going to swap the urine right after the Vancouver Games, which were in 2010, because Russia wins 10 medals. So now the next
10 goals or 10 total?
10 total medals.
Oh, wow.
Right? So this is a disaster for Russia. And they're going, wait, we're hosting the next Olympic Games. There is no way in hell we are going to go in there and win 10 medals. This is an embarrassment for the country. So they decide that they're going to swap the urine. And the FSB starts working on how they're going to do this. And they went through, according to Grigory, all sorts of different things. First, they were trying to get the caps manufactured for them. So, like, basically they just bust open the tops and they'd have a matching fraudulent cap.
Because all the caps, so the bottle and the cap has the code on it.
Exactly.
They have to obviously be the same.
So they were trying to redesign the caps.
Yep.
Then they were trying to...
Which isn't that crazy? Like, why couldn't you?
Right,
I mean,
but basically a fraudulent cap. And they somehow basically figured out through like a micro tool kit how to essentially put these tools into the bottle and press up. And there was just, I guess, enough clearance that they could open up this bottle undetected. But in so doing, and this is how it was proven that they had opened these bottles and swapped it, when they went back and looked at these bottles under a microscope, they could see the scratches from these tools.
Did the athletes know? Were the athletes? I mean, the athletes knew that they were doping, or did they not know? But by and large, the Russian athletes.
According to Grigory, it was one of these systems
that
where
kind of changes the story for
where everybody. It was kind of like the idea of, okay, everybody kind of knew, but nobody knew exactly what was going on.
Because think about it, if you're the athlete and you know you're doping, you have to be thinking, well, I'm going to be tested. So they either know they're doping, know they're going to get tested, and the FSB says, don't worry about it, we got it covered. Or they don't know they're doping. They're being given, however they're being administered, vitamins, et cetera, whatever they would call it. Right. So they think they're clean. And the FSB says, we're going to make sure they're clean. You know what I'm saying? Like it's
well, I would,
or is there a hybrid?
I would say it's a hybrid, but in my personal opinion, and I think Grigory would back me on this, is that the athletes knew they were doping because a year before Sochi, all of them had to go off of taking anything, and for 6 weeks they were collecting their clean urine samples. So every one of those athletes at Sochi, they had 6 or 7 clean urine samples of each one of those athletes to swap. And what they would do is in those clean urine samples, Grigory had already analyzed the specific gravity, basically the weight of the urine, the salt content, the steroid profile of those urines. So when they peed that day, he could best match their clean urine with the dirty urine, right? And then swap it and adjust and then adjust the salt content in the urine, which was the specific gravity. So when they went back and tested these samples, they found exorbitant levels of salt, table salt, in the urine because he is using salt to adjust the specific gravity on the which was noted on the doping control forms. So I would say that the majority of the athletes did know because they were collecting their clean urine. What the athletes didn't know was how it was being done.
Okay.
They didn't know it was being swapped. They didn't know. They just knew that they were asked to pee cleanly, that they were off all of their vitamins or medications, and they were collecting their urine in like things like plastic water bottles and soda cans, and so even when they brought these things to Sochi, according to Grigory, the freezer in the FSB of all the clean urines was literally like a bunch of plastic water bottles and Perrier bottles and Pellegrino. It was whatever the athletes could pee into, and they were all labeled.
I mean, I mean, something that sophisticated boils down to something that not sophisticated. That just doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
So we know that they swapped dirty urine for clean urine, or vice versa, which got them off the hook. But let's just say, for example, and as I watched the documentary, I thought, you can reverse this too. If you had a country, you say, or you show very clearly what happens at the end of Sochi. Putin's popularity before Sochi is, I mean, you guys start winning gold medals, and it's like a rocket ship took off. He has the highest popularity in forever. Bam, attacks Ukraine. All right, so his popularity is decreasing, then all of a sudden it shoots up, and then he attacks Ukraine. So obviously he's got a beef with Ukraine. I mean, would they go so far as to say, this Ukrainian, or whoever it is, this Ukrainian's urine is clean, but we're going to make it dirty?
Yes.
They did that.
So what happened? So what happened? And Grigory, according to Grigory, he said no. He was approached on multiple occasions to basically do exactly that. They asked him to essentially take a Ukrainian athlete's clean sample and make it dirty. And he said no.
So it didn't happen.
According to Grigory, the answer is no. I don't have a, and everything that he has said is certainly proven to be true. But apparently when he was asked to do that, which he was asked to do, he said, no, I'm not going to do that.
Because when you
drew a line.
It's the first thing that came to my mind when you showed, almost immediately he goes into Ukraine, starts a war. I'm like, immediately I was like, surely they did a reversal here. And so I'm glad they did.
Well, it's interesting that you came up with that, because to me, the question that it left me, which is always, I think, the thing in anti-doping, is what we've learned is that just because somebody says they're clean doesn't mean they're clean. Mm-hmm. And then oftentimes if somebody tests dirty, there is this notion of, if you believe Alberto Contador, that he ate tainted meat, or there's this notion of there's always a defense. So when somebody tests dirty,
you're telling me,
yeah, there's always a defense.
I know.
And then of course, what we've come to learn is that clean doesn't mean you're clean. And what stuck out to me about the whole urine swapping thing, aside from the Russian athletes, is it called into question, well, has this been done before? Who else might have done this? How do we know that even if anybody's sample is dirty, that now we have the potential that it could have been swapped,
right?
Or that somebody's clean sample could have been swapped for a dirty one.
It's that's sophisticated. It can be even easier, right? Where does the Ukrainian team stay for the Sochi Games? They stay in a hotel in Sochi. The employees are Russian, and the FSB is standing outside. They're eating the restaurant's food. They can't control everything they drink, everything they eat. It would be so easy to contaminate just their food. And then you don't have to worry about swapping it. I mean, it is that. You don't even need to contaminate it so that they test positive. You could contaminate it so that they get sick. You could guarantee that they either have a poor performance or they lose their result. I mean, that's much easier.
Yeah, I mean, the possibilities are limitless.
That we were always worried about. That's why we eventually started cooking our, trying to control as much as we could, buy all of our own food, cook all of our own food, water, drinks, etc., just to prevent, outside contamination.